my prosthetic leg that I had malfunctioned and I fell over and broke my other leg. So here I was in a wheelchair again, now not able to walk at all, which nearly broke me. But what I found was that people didn't know how to respond to that. I had had so much bad things happen that actually people didn't know what to say to me. Things were spiraling out of control. And it was at that point that I knew that I had to do whatever it took to get home.
Welcome to the Success Times Happiness podcast, a platform dedicated to engaging discussions with inspiring individuals aimed at nurturing personal development. I'm Richard Thompson, your host, a father, entrepreneur, world champion Ultraman, and passionate about all things high performance. Our mission is to empower both ourselves and you to unlocking our fullest potential, recognizing that this life is no dress rehearsal. While I may not have all the answers, this show serves as our collective journey to uncover them. This episode, we sit down with Paula Gowland, the businesswoman, author, mentor, and motivational speaker. As a result of her experiences, she has dedicated her life to supporting others to triumph over trauma. In 2014, after accidentally falling off a chair at home, Paula broke her leg in 4 places, which resulted in a series of events that left her in hospital for 758 days, 20 surgeries, making the decision to amputate her leg firstly below the knee and then ultimately above the knee. Then in rehab, Paula broke her other leg, rendering her back to hospital and confined to a wheelchair for months. In this crazy, inspiring chat, expect to learn insights into overcoming trauma and finding strength in the face of adversity, practical strategies for navigating setbacks and cultivating resilience in everyday life, and the pivotal role of love, commitment, and compassion in overcoming life's greatest challenges. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we did. Let's get into it. Paula Gowland, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's so exciting. From what we've seen, I guess, looking into your story and following along, it's really inspiring, and we've been looking forward to this chat for a little while now.
It is definitely a unique story. So,
kick things off, the general premise of your story, I guess, and the journey that you're on now centers around trauma. The general premise for everyone, I hope, is that we all want to live the life that we're destined for, or to try to extract the most out of our existence. But trauma will come, and presumably everyone's trauma is their own trauma, and it's not necessarily to compare. But why does trauma form such a roadblock in finding our own potential in life?
well, first of all, I think people don't realise that they're actually in trauma when they're in it as well. People tend to look at trauma as a car accident, or like me, losing a leg. It has to be huge for it to be trauma. But I think a lot of us go through life having different upbringings and different things that happen in their life that cause trauma, that they don't actually realise that that's what comes to kind of get them later on in life.
And is it that those experiences, maybe not the big experiences that you're referred to, that sort of inconspicuously catch up to the person, and maybe what's sort of the roadblock on their potential?
Yeah, I think it definitely, the way we look at the world and the way we make decisions is definitely based around trauma, and it's then helping people to make different decisions and see the world a little bit differently to help them move through the roadblocks.
Almost they're making those decisions to prevent, subconsciously or consciously, prevent
It happening again.
Or opening that Pandora's box, and that those feelings come in and all the like.
Yep.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So talk me through your story for the people that don't know.
Okay.
Let's get into this, because I know that trauma is not, I'm a big believer that you can't compare, right?
Yeah,
Your
definitely.
experience is so, there is so much darkness in that story, but also obviously, and it's so inspiring for me. I guess the purpose of this channel, this podcast, is to tap it. I really get inspired about people who are up against it, and you could either cower in the corner for the rest of your life and play the victim, or you can actually pull your socks up and go after it.
Yep.
In spite of it. And it's like that, the Marcus Aurelius quote of the impediment to action advances action. and what stands in your way becomes the way. Like the obstacle is the way. Like the trauma inadvertently becomes your biggest asset.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me about your experience.
So I guess my story starts where back in 2014, I decided it was a great idea to hang freshly washed curtains. And I stood on the end of my bed and pulled all the little plasticky things together to just quickly hang up the curtains. My family and husband was sitting on the lounge waiting to watch The Hobbit. And I just said to them, I actually said, just let me do this and I'll be good. And as I've reached forward to hang the curtains, I slipped off the bed and I landed on my feet, but I heard a crack. And it was at that point there I knew I had broken my leg. And of course, I've collapsed in the corner and screaming to my husband to come and help me. The pain was just excruciating. And at first, he actually said, oh, you'll be good. You've probably just dislocated it, and tried to lift me up. But the sheer pain of that is when I knew that there was something really, really wrong. So we called an ambulance, and unfortunately we were in a unit at the time, and the ambulance couldn't get the stretcher up the lift. So we had to wait for a second ambulance to come so that they could carry the stretcher to the third floor that we were on. And in that time, my leg swelled quite quickly. So by the time I did make it to hospital, my leg was too swollen to operate. And they decided to do what was called external fixations. And that was where they put the rods on the outside of the leg. And something went wrong after that operation. I had what was called compartment syndrome. You only actually have 12 hours to reverse compartment syndrome. And unfortunately for me, it wasn't picked up for 24 days. So by the time they went in to put the pins, plates and screws in, 24 days later, my leg was dead and still dying.
What's compartment syndrome?
So compartment syndrome is the muscles in our body have like a sausage skin around them. And what should have happened is they should have just sliced my leg open from my hip to my ankle to let the muscles breathe, and then we would have been able to just sew them back up later on. Would have had a huge scar on my leg, but I would have had a leg. Whereas they actually started to die over those 24 days, and it was irreparable. So I tried 7 operations to save my leg, but in the end, I actually sought a second opinion from a surgeon in Sydney, and he flew to Brisbane, took one look at my leg, looked at my, what had happened, and put me on the next plane, and he amputated that night. So I had my leg amputated in Sydney in the September.
A month after you fell.
No, I fell on the 1st of June.
Okay.
And my leg was amputated in September, end of August, September.
And during this initial stay in hospital, you've broken your leg, it's swollen. Every single person in your scenario is just like, I'll get it. There'll be a surgery. They'll probably if it's broken badly, we all sort of understand. You'd pin it inside or pin it outside, as your case was. It'll be okay.
It'll be okay, yeah.
A cast will go on. People write on the cast. It'll be okay.
Yes.
Over that period of time, and it's obviously uncommon in a break that you'd have multiple surgeries. What is happening internally with you and the discussions with your husband at that time going, this isn't going to plan. This isn't what we were thinking that this is happening. And then at what stage is the risk of amputation coming into the communication, the discussions?
It really didn't hit us until I actually saw parts of my foot actually turning gangrene. And I could actually see it for myself that there was something really, really wrong. I was actually told that I was going to have the leg amputated because it had been 7 operations and because the leg was not functioning. And I was being told that even if we were to fix it, I was going to have to drag it around for the rest of my life.
Right.
It was almost like relief. But unfortunately, my story doesn't stop there because after it had been amputated, we still thought that because I had it amputated below the knee first, And we still thought that it would still get fixed. I'd get a prosthetic leg and we'd be good to go. So initially it was the day that Munja told me that we had to amputate, it was kind of like a relief. But transformed 24 hours later, when I woke up with no leg, it was definitely not a relief. It was definitely one of those moments where I don't think I can go on. I don't think I can be a mum. I don't think I can be a wife. It looked terrible. I automatically felt like I was so deformed. It was a big shock.
The moment where you woke up and saw it not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can kind of visualize what it was going to be like to not have a leg and that, it's only a bit of a leg and a foot. How hard can it be? But to actually wake up that morning and see.
Was there an element of a grieving process? Because you're never, like, obviously that limb has been with you forever.
Yeah.
And you never expect to lose a limb, right?
No.
You expect to pass away with all the things. But
Yep.
there is an element of like, well, I'm never going to have that again. Was there a grieving period? Not
Yes.
necessarily the trauma, but there was a grieving.
There was definitely a grieving period
Yeah.
of probably for me right up until my next surgery, which was another year later of being, not only was I grieving a leg, I was grieving the life that I had. I was stuck in a hospital because unfortunately we couldn't get rid of probably about a centimetre of infection that was still left in the bone. That kept me in hospital for another year. And so by the time
You're in hospital for like
I was actually in hospital for 756 days.
straight days.
I'd get out maybe for a week or two. Munja sent me home for Christmas one year, and but it was never home. It was always either in hospital having treatment or in hospital having just sitting there having to have antibiotics because the antibiotics that I was having was so strong that you couldn't have it at home. I lived in hospital for the best part of 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so they couldn't get control over the infection.
No, so we couldn't get control over the infection. The CT scans kept showing that there was about a centimetre left of infection in the bone. As much as we tried, everything we possibly could to not have that above knee amputation, by the June 2016, I had had enough and I needed to get home.
For the listeners, what are you playing up against in terms of below amputation, below the knee amputation, and above the knee amputation? What does that look like for life? As when you're toying that up.
So as a below amputee, I still had the functioning knee, so I could still. It really, for me, it wasn't really that hard to get used to a below knee amputee. It was just making sure that your knee was in the right place. You still had, you could still move quite easily. But once I went as an above knee amputee, everything changed. You had no stability. You needed a lot of core strength, and I'd been sitting around not doing much
for 2 years.
So the body wasn't ready to stand properly. Hours and hours of physiotherapy that had to go into just being able to be strong enough to have the core strength just to walk. And it looked, I thought a below knee, when I woke up from the amputation of a below knee, I thought that looked terrible. When I woke up from the amputation as an above knee, it actually looked like a Christmas ham sitting there. And I think that was the biggest shock that I had when I first saw what my leg looked like as an above knee amputee. It just didn't even look normal.
In that period of time, are you running a movie in your mind about what if you just watched The Hobbit and just left the curtains? It's like that seems to be, and certainly in my experiences, you just run that what ifs scenarios, and I imagine that's a fairly common thing to do. It doesn't get you really anywhere, but
no, I did run that. It was the guilt. It was the grief, the guilt of, my youngest was 7 at the time. My eldest was 17 and my middle daughter was 12, 13. And it was the guilt of, why did I do that? Because I've been ripped out of my family home. My husband's living life without a wife because he's in one state and I'm in another. And the guilt and the thought process that was going through about why did I do that haunted me for quite some time. But there was a point where I had to let that go because I couldn't change it. It had happened, and I had to learn to live life without that guilt and without that constantly attacking myself for doing that.
Might be easy to answer in hindsight, but do you think you were always, what's your view on, I guess, causation or fate? Do you think you were always destined for that to occur then? Is that how you find in your position? And because the way you've been able to use it to be so inspiring in this next chapter of your life, but for that experience, you're not here.
I think, so what happened was a lot of people kept saying to me, your story is so crazy, you should write a book. And when I actually sat down to write the book, it was in that moment that I realized that this wasn't about losing a leg. This was about my story, and my story started as a very young child with an alcoholic mother. And so when you ask the question about trauma, I was actually I actually had quite significant trauma, but didn't actually realize it until I was 42 years of age, that the trauma that I lived with as a young child from the memories I have are from 3 to 10 of living with an alcoholic mother, even though I had the best life, but it still wasn't normal like everybody else. I had to tell that story first to be able for people to understand where my strength came from. So I don't think I actually, fell off my bed, broke my leg, lost my leg and became strong. I think that resilience was actually fostered from how I grew up.
Well, let's get there then, and if you don't mind sharing what childhood looked like.
So childhood for me looked like lots of parties, lots of people having fun, lots of people always drunk and silly, and drinking was just a big part of our family. But there were times where, as a very young 5-year-old, I would be cleaning up after a party that was done and dusted, and people were still drinking first thing in the morning, and there was never any malice, or I was never mistreated or anything like that. But I learnt to clean up after my mum. I learnt to hide the things that mum was doing that didn't necessarily look right. I learnt to look after my sister because mum couldn't. So I didn't see it as she was doing something wrong. I just saw it as that she wasn't capable of doing it. So I would step in.
Thereby building the strength.
Yeah. And I think, my father was an amazing man, and he taught us that we could be anything and do anything we wanted. And he really encouraged mum to go to AA, and he really worked with her. And I guess that was also showing that he was having compassion around helping and fixing somebody that actually couldn't help or fix themselves. And she went on to do AAs, and she hasn't now had a drink for nearly 40 years.
Wow.
So it was being shown by people in our family in a really strange and silly way of an alcoholic mother and a very loving and empathetic father, and an amazing family community. It was hidden a lot in those days, and all of the family knew that she was an alcoholic, but it was kind of like they rallied around so that nobody knew, I guess.
But it also showed you the value of having that key person or people to help.
Yes.
Right, which is obviously where you're heading at the moment.
Yeah.
At a rate of knots, to be able to be that person for someone.
Yeah. if you look at trauma, we get to a point in our lives where we either mimic exactly what has happened to us and we become just like them, or we do the complete opposite. And I think, obviously I've done the complete opposite to what I've seen and what I don't want to be like. But I don't always think we think that we make that choice ourselves.
Yeah, right. And then back to your experience then. So you get the knee amputated. And then what is life like?
Well, for us, for me, it was exciting. I was coming home. I was an above amputee. I'd mastered walking after a month of thinking I was never going to master walking. But I'd finally ticked all the boxes. I'd checked that I could get in and out of a car. I could cross a road. And there were lots of things that we had to tick off before we were allowed to go home.
Right.
And I'd done the whole thing and I was coming home. But what I came home to was a completely different life that I had left. I'd come home to a son that was very angry that he's with his father because he felt that John was keeping him away from me. Because being 7, he didn't realise he couldn't just go and see mum whenever he liked. I had a 13-year-old that had grown into, by this stage, a 14-year-old that was a little bit off the rails. And I'd had my 17-year-old who was now, nearly 19, had become mum and replaced me. So when I came home, I kind of didn't know, one, where I fitted into the family. John had also taken up alcohol to become his new wife, which wasn't sitting with me very well either. And everything was changed. Everything was different. We'd lost our business. We'd lost our house in the process. And John was still, we lost half of our business. John was still maintaining the carpet cleaning side of our business at the time. But he was also looking after 3 children. So his hours for work had been reduced. And everything was hard. Everything for me, it was, for the first month or two, they all rallied around and helped. But then they had actually witnessed for the very first time what life was like to have a mum that was an amputee. Because when I came home, I was still in and out of a wheelchair. I still couldn't walk, 24 hours a day. It would still get very sore and it was a gradual process of being strong enough to stand on it and use it all day. So there were things that they had to do for me. There was, things that had to be done that I could no longer do. I couldn't stand in the kitchen to cook dinner. I couldn't, things were different and I was feeling very much out of place and not able to understand, I guess, initially why everybody was so different. Because it had been 2 years.
It's a long time.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a really tough road, Ashley, in that once I came home and we kind of got our work life going, we built our cleaning business back up to be able to sell it because John and I had made a decision that we weren't going to ever be apart for that long again and we wanted to do something employment-wise together. So we just purchased Sunshine Coast Art and Framing Gallery and our first week of taking over that business, we got a call from the hospital saying our daughter had tried to commit suicide. So that was, a whole new process that we were having to deal with. We had her in a mental health unit in Caloundra, and then that becomes all the guilt and the enormity of the whole thing comes back to me. I had to really be careful that I didn't go down and start blaming myself and had to really keep myself above what I'd promised where I would never go. So it then became, 16 months of working with her and getting her life back on track. And she had gotten to a point in her life where she didn't want to ask her father or me for help because of the trauma that we were already going through. So her as a teenager was trying to deal with everything until she couldn't.
Mm. It must be challenging as a mother to hear those words that your daughter or your child has attempted to take their own life.
Yeah. Especially, once, because I was able to look at the enormity of it and how it had changed the trauma that by me being in hospital and away from the family, I could now see how each person had changed and how each person had dealt with it very differently.
Mm.
I guess that's where my compassion came in, and as a mum, that lioness was, my focus was solely on her, and I had to do whatever it took to get her better.
I can somewhat relate in the sense that, and I'm obviously not speaking for her, but she probably had that position of it. She couldn't come to you to explain to you how she was feeling, because she can acknowledge that you're dealing with huge amounts.
issues.
And it's like, well, and I only relate to it because I lost one of my best friends a few years ago, and who was married, had young kids similar to me and to brain cancer. His wife, who's just the most beautiful human, and I still struggle to talk to her about it because who am I compared to her, right? Her trauma is huge, and
Yeah.
who am I to complain about what suffering that I'm going through because I'm just his friend. I'm not his wife. I'm not his father. Like, he's not my father.
Yeah.
So I can somewhat relate, right? To go, I don't want to bother her because she'd be 6 times more, 10 times, 100 times more struggling than I am.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I also experienced. People don't know how to respond to trauma. People didn't know how to come in and see me after I'd been in hospital for so long, after I had dealt with so much, a below knee, an above knee, and then, I also fell over and broke my other leg in all of this as well. So there was a period in that where, I was walking to the toilet, my prosthetic leg that I had malfunctioned, and I fell over and broke my other leg. So here I was in a wheelchair again, now not able to walk at all, which nearly broke me. But what I found was that people didn't know how to respond to that. I had so much bad things happen that actually people didn't know what to say to me. And so they actually started to avoid me.
Mm.
And I think if I could let anybody know out there, somebody that's going through trauma, we still need to know that we're loved. And even if you don't know what to say, a hug or a just sit with me in silence was better than nothing.
Mm. At what point do you turn the ship around internally for you? Because this, as you said, there's so many things objectively that are like, what is next, right?
Yeah, so the turning point for me really was whilst I was still in hospital. Things were going really badly with Ethan and John. Ethan was not coping with me being away at all. John had taken to alcohol as his wife, and things were spiraling out of control there. And it was a day that my daughter called me and said, "Mum, you have to do something. Dad and Ethan are yelling at each other. Dad's kicked Ethan out of the house. He's 7, and he wasn't coping." And it was at that point that I knew that I had to do whatever it took to get home. So that meant for me, I had to accept what was going on. I actually tried to call a psychologist here on the coast to actually go and find my husband to make sure that he was okay, which is so not done. Usually you have to go to the psychologist for help, not the other way around. It was at that point that I had to make a decision that this couldn't go on. I had to do whatever it took. And that meant that I had to get myself out of bed. I had to get myself strong enough to get that prosthetic leg to be able to get home to my family.
But then it continues though with your daughter and the fact that you've now slipped over and broken the other leg.
Yes.
But is that you're already in a mindset to say, well, these are just in.
When I broke my other leg, that was really another pivotal point where it was kind of like, sure, who does that? Who breaks their leg, amputates twice, and then breaks the other leg? Like, how much bad luck can I have? And it took a good month for me to get out of the grief of the life that I didn't think I was ever going to achieve. But being around the family and seeing the difficulties that everybody was having, it almost became my mission that I had to help everybody that was around me. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be left with a family.
Mm.
And there was a pivotal point where I actually had to almost walk away. Well, I walked away from John because I couldn't allow myself to see what he was going to do to himself because of the situation. And it was lucky for me that he did go and seek help. And he now also hasn't had any alcohol for nearly 5 years now. But there was that time where you can't keep going the way it was.
Mm.
But I was determined to try and keep the family together.
A quote that I saw in preparation for this, our chat, is that we don't get over or move on from our trauma. We're forced to make space for it. We carry it, but we learn to live with it. And sometimes we thrive in spite of it.
Yeah.
When did you think, well, these experiences are making me stronger and that I want to now help others?
Yeah. So throughout my whole journey, I also would post things on Facebook and I would let people know what was going on. It was my only connection to the world. But what that started to do was I started to have people coming back to me a year later saying, well, I watched your story from afar and you've helped me to be where I was to where I am now. And I honestly had no idea that by sharing exactly the real stuff that was happening to me, be it very ugly some days, that it was actually helping others. Now that I'm fortunate enough to have 2 businesses that are run quite successfully with managers and people in place, that it's now my time to be able to give back and help the community for exactly those reasons, to help others to move from where they are to where they want to be.
Okay. That's so inspiring. And so what can we do? As I said, everyone has their own trauma and we can only compare it to the other events that we've had in our life.
Yeah.
What's the first step? What's the framework that you've developed?
Well, I think that's, as ironic as it sounds, it's the first step. And the first step is to reach out and to maybe have a chat and see where I can help or what strategies we can put in place to help you move to the next step. It's so important to just be able to talk with somebody that has had the experience of trauma in lots of different scenarios, to be able to help somebody see that there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. But we have to change a few things along the way. And we have to start with what's between our 2 ears.
I remember someone saying to me at the relevant time, oh, you just need some time.
Yeah.
And I find that idea of, I mean, the phrase of the time heals all wounds, but also just it just is going to take some time to get over. And to a certain degree, I accept that, but it's within that time, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. But it's within that period of time that it takes for you to find the solution to move forward.
Yeah.
And it's not the time itself; it's the finding the toolkit.
Yes.
To get through it.
And I think that's what was very evident in hospital. I had all the help I could need. I had doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, prosthetists, everybody around me, making sure that mentally, physically, I was okay. But my family had nobody. They had nothing. And there's no rule book out there that says, how do you do life when mum gets ripped out and has lost a leg?
Mm.
So to be able to time for my kids was terrible. They had too much time to think. They had too much time to create scenarios in their head that were never going to happen. And I think time is great, but if we're not using that time to work on our minds, then you can end up in a very dark place.
It almost works against you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's what I had, because I had all the time in the world to sit and think.
Mm.
And if I didn't put the positive things into my mind, it could have gone completely the other way.
How do you inspire, or what do you say, or what can people do if they are stuck in that, like, still cowering in the corner, they're still playing the victim, they still haven't got through? You know, you talk about that there was a pivotal moment of your daughter saying you need to do something.
Yeah, and
Like-
for me, it really was minute by minute, hour by hour in the very early days.
Mm.
So I found ways to anchor how I was feeling to be able to get through. For me at first, it was actually as simple as I had an aromatherapy oil that I would sniff every time I was feeling like I couldn't even wipe the tears away from my eyes, and that would get me through the next minute.
Mm.
And then it was,
And in that moment, it is, right? It is minute by minute.
It
Or
is.
The minutes take hours, but it is just
it is, yeah.
accepting that this isn't going away quickly, and you just
No.
have to just manage the now.
And so then that led me to, the next, I guess, setting little goals for yourself. It led me to, getting out of bed and having a shower for the first time, walking to the corridor to talk to the nurse for the first time, and then walking to somebody else and meeting somebody else in the hallway or in another room that was also becoming an amputee. But listening to others, and it was also that point where I was meeting people that had been blown up in Afghanistan with no legs and no arms, and I would actually walk away from their rooms going, I'm good. I've still got 3 limbs, and it was finding those things to be grateful for.
Yeah, gratitude's a huge one, and you can always find, as challenging it is. I interviewed Julian Burton, who was a Bali bombing survivor.
Yep.
And I think he had 60% third-degree burns of his
Yeah.
body, but they were almost all coverable.
Yeah.
Like, you could put it, it's all his back and his front, and so otherwise not necessarily defaced or anything. And
Yeah.
he recounted that he very quickly realized through going through the burns ward that he's lucky.
He was lucky.
Yeah, and it's that great gratitude bit.
Yep.
And then he would speak to someone who had significant disfiguration from that experience, from the Bali bombing.
Yeah.
And they were grateful
Yes.
because they were alive,
That's right.
and then it's
And
like,
it just-
oh, wow,
wow.
that's
Yeah.
powerful.
And very similar situation for me.
Yeah. And Kim Morrison also sat across the table here, and she talked about that as much as it's a challenging moment, there's still some woman in Gaza that would kill to be in this position, in your position or whatever that is.
Yes.
There's always someone. You were always, it's an interesting bit, but
Yes.
The
Well, Kim
gratitude.
Morrison was actually one of the angels that came to see me when I was in
look
hospital.
at that.
Mm,
She is
yeah.
salt of the earth.
Yes.
Salt of the earth human. And then also the other reference I wanted to make and pay homage to is Bridget Woolnough, who was on the show. She's from Cocoa Pod and a business up here, a really, really incredible business up here. And she had this quote that was, and I guess this is in line with how you view people after you've experienced trauma or after you've experienced something pretty heavy, is just because it is carried well doesn't mean it's not heavy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how do you go now with all of this experience? You're on this path. You're an incredible businesswoman and multi-award winner in that aspect. and you're on this path of helping others and inspiring others to get through their trauma. But how do you, even now in the sort of silent moments of your life where you reflect and look back inside and talk to yourself, how has that developed?
Look, still every day, sometimes I'll come up with a challenge where there's that quick thought of, God, I wish I had 2 legs. That still happens for me every day. Only yesterday I woke up with excruciating nerve pain, and it almost feels like my foot is on fire, and I just want to take my prosthetic leg off and throw the foot that I can see in the bin. But there's nothing I can do. And there are days for me that are really tough because I can't stop the nerve pain, and I can't stop the phantom limb from going crazy. And, I actually have to sit down and just think that this too will pass. And it usually does pretty quickly. But there are still days where I have to really fight to put that smile on sometimes. But when I'm at that point, I always I have a gratitude diary that I do every day, and I look for something else to be thankful for.
You are just so inspiring, Paula, and I really appreciate your honesty. And I mean, it sounds like you realized that if you're open and honest about your own experience, it inspires others.
Yeah.
And thank you for that.
No, it's my pleasure. I just, I really do think that I can make a difference to people's lives, and just would, whatever comes my way, even if I just help one person, then I've done what I'm meant to do.
Yeah, so good. And we'll put all your details, contact details, and links to the book in the show notes as well. But before you go, there are 5 quick questions that we ask.
Sure.
The first one is, what does success mean to you?
I guess success to me means that I'm sitting on a beach with my family, knowing that everything is covered and we don't really have a care in the world, but we're together.
I love that. What does happiness mean to you?
Oh, happiness is sharing that glass of wine with my friend every week and being able to talk about anything and just being together.
Yeah.
Being together with my family.
Yeah, beautiful. Other than your own book, which is incredible, a book that you would recommend others to read?
I would recommend the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Success and Business.
Okay.
That one has been a real turning point for me. I really enjoyed that one.
Awesome. If you could invite 4 people to dinner, or who are dead or alive, but not friends or family, who would you invite?
I would actually invite my dad, who is no longer with us, even though he is family.
Yeah.
But I would love to have Barack Obama at my dinner table. I would love Oprah Winfrey at my dinner table.
Oh, no, one more.
One more?
Yeah, one more.
Probably look to get a different perspective. Let's put Donald Trump in there.
There's some fireworks. And then finally, a guest who you think would be great to come on the show.
I think Jaya from Empire Art. She has an incredible story as well, and I think that she would be a great person to interview.
Fantastic. You'll need to help us connect.
Absolutely.
Paula Gowland, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It is such an inspiring. Your life is inspiring. The way you look at it, it's just, I'm a bit speechless. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. Next time you know someone dealing with adversity, feel free to share them this episode. It'll help them, and it really means the world to us. Until next time.